We are well into the space-time Smackdown being released for Pokemon Pocket, so today it's time for an updated best decks tier list video. Let's sort through the most common decks in the format and give you my opinion on where they line up in terms of power level. We're going to start off at the bottom of the barrel today with the D tier. These are all deck lists that I would never recommend in terms of pure power level, but they all feature iconic Pokemon that people often are looking for deck lists to play with, so they see some amount to play, so it's worth being familiar with them, or if you want to play them yourself. We start off the D tier with two format powerhouses from our previous meta games. Pikachu EX and Mewtwo EX have both fallen a great deal. Dialga Melmetal earns its spot in the D tier, and of course, Dragonite is the D tier champion. Mewtwo EX Gardevoir variations that were one of the best decks since Pocket launched have fallen completely from grace during the Space-Time Smackdown expansion. There are three primary reasons that they are struggling. The first is the direct and obvious. Darkrai and Dark decks got a bunch of new tools which have a direct type advantage into Mewtwo. The second is that the introduction of Pokemon tools, and specifically Giant Cape, mean that there's a lot more Pokemon in the metagame that have 160 or even more HP regularly, meaning charging up Mewtwo's side drive and hitting for 150 every single turn isn't quite the big blast that it used to be. And finally, Cyrus, as a powerful new supporter to the metagame, means that you can't safely retreat your Mewtwo anymore once it's taken some hits as your lead without your opponent being able to wrangle it right back up to the front and knock it out, getting 2 of the 3 points that they need to win the game. Now, I will say I would wager there's probably innovation to be had if you like playing the card Mewtwo EX specifically, but so far nobody's found exactly that right formula, and these older Gardevoir builds, despite getting new tools like Pokemon Communication to assemble their support card more consistently, are just not good any longer. There's been a little bit more experimenting with Pikachu EX builds in our community tournaments, but nothing that's consistently found success so far, earning it its D ranking today. Similar to Mewtwo, Cyrus being a new supporter in the format has done Pikachu a huge disservice. A lot of the strength of this deck in our previous metagames was your ability to bob and weave low retreat costs and low energy cost attackers in and out of your active spot, making it difficult for your opponent to chase down the knockout points that they need. Cyrus makes it so this is no longer a viable strategy, and once your Pikachu has 100 or so damage marked on it, it's just going to get drugged right back up to the front of the class and knocked out, closing out the game pretty quickly. Melmetal was one of the most anticipated uses of Dialga EX after it was revealed, but unfortunately it's proven to be the worst of the possible pairings for it. In particular, this build suffers from a lot of the same issues that Pikachu and Mewtwo do, landing it in D tier, which is leading on an EX Pokemon often means it's going to get knocked out as opposed to retreated for safety, with Cyrus existing in the metagame, and following up an EX knockout with a single knockout point Melmetal is often not ideal. It also means if something like your Meltan gets caught out early and then you move into your Dialga, the game is going to be just over once your EX Pokemon goes down. Dragonite isn't a top tier contender, but it's still a fan favorite Pokemon that sees a good amount of play. Magneton alongside Dawn as a way to filter lightning energy is one direction these deck lists have taken, as well as Manaphy allowing you to turn one energy into multiple across your Pokemon lets you set up a Dragonite and something like an Articuno as a secondary attacker simultaneously, which makes you a little bit less all in on your primary Pokemon. Dragonite also gained Pokemon Communication as a tool to help it assemble its Stage 2 more consistently. That being said, it's still both high variance, a 2-color energy deck, and Draco Meteor being completely random on the board means it keeps its spot in the Dragonite or D tier. Moving along to our C tier decks today, I think everything in here is relatively powerful, especially when everything comes together, but they tend to be a little bit inconsistent, often needing a Stage 2 Pokemon as soon as possible to really hit their stride. Essentially, everything in this category has put up a number of sporadic finishes in our community tournament, but they're also things that you're not surprised when you look at the top rankings and don't see any of them present. Our C tier decks right now, in my opinion, are various Stage 2 focused decks like Gallade Fighting variations, Infernape variations, Togekiss aggressive decks, Luxray variations, Garchomp variations, Venusaur featuring Shaman, and then more cheesy strategies featuring just 2 basic Pokemon like 18 Trainer Pachirisu, as well as Bastiodon Skarmory. Gallade is a card that's really impressed me the more that I've played with it in Pokemon Pocket. These stage 2 attackers that hit for 2 energy are some of the most aggressive starts you can have in the game, especially when the stage 1, like Krylia here, attacks for 1. You evolve, attach your first energy, hit for 20. You evolve to your stage 2 and start attacking for 70, 90, or even 110, depending on where your opponent allocated their starting energy. This deck has a pretty similar matchup table to a lot of the other fighting variations in the game, which is to say, thanks to Hitmonlee, you tend to be very good against things leading with stalling Pokemon like Druddigon, and you tend to come up a little bit short against things like Executor EX that are hitting you hard and fast while also having really beefy HP pools. Infernape is easily the most aggressive card in Pokemon Pocket right now. When you hit this bad Mamajama on curve going first, you crack for 30 with Monferno and then 140 for a total of 170 with Infernape before your opponent even has a chance to get their own stage 2s online. This being fire typing also means that you burn through chunky things in the metagame like Executor EX in a single blow as well. There are 2 primary variations of Infernape decks that are finding success. The first of these is a more straightforward Moltres variation where you lead on this tanky EX Pokemon, power up your Infernape on the bench, and then kind of pivot back and forth between them to close out the game. One of the big strengths of this build is the inclusion of the supporter Dawn at 2 copies. Dawn can let you push an extra energy onto Moltres early to start attacking with that ASAP, but she also serves double duty because you could use her to attack twice in a row with Infernape despite discarding all of your energies each time that you do it. The other build of Infernape looks to play a little bit more of an organic game where you lead single knockout point Pokemon. In the example list here, I have Rapidash as well as Farfetch, but other options include things like Dodrio and even Salandit, and then you kind of finish the game with Infernape as your finisher while you bob back and forth between it and your single knockout points in the mid game. Togekiss is next up on our list of aggressively slanted stage 2 cards, with this one having the large upside of being just a single knockout point Pokemon, which means that many times over the course of the game, you can assemble not just one, but both of these, because once your opponent clears the first, you likely still have a point or 2 left to give. Togekiss' biggest strength is definitely the fact that it gets to play the incredibly powerful supporter Cynthia, which adds a whopping 50 points of damage. This lets you rev up your first attack to 110 or your subsequent attacks to 170, which trucks through even most EX Pokemon in a single blow. Our sample deck list here is leveraging Sigilyph as well as Giratina as ways to buy yourself time and draw you cards. You can get one or both Togekiss online before the end of the game. One noteworthy interaction if you're going to be playing with this deck is any effect that forces your Togekiss back to the bench, such as a Sabrina or a Cyrus, will unfortunately disrupt the power of Overdrive, denying you your bonus the subsequent turn. With how much of a meme Dragonite's been since Pokemon Pocket launched, I was pleasantly surprised at how reasonable Garchomp feels when everything comes together. Similar to all the other stage 2s we've talked about so far in this group, Garchomp's incredibly aggressive when you're going first and have everything line up. You can attach your second energy and start cracking for 100 points of damage right away. That occasionally kicks up to 150 with the supporter Cynthia. There's been a few different successful Garchomp lists in community events so far, but I've got my 2 favorites here up on the screen. The thing that I think is especially noteworthy about these successful Garchomp lists is that they're not all in on just leveraging the dragon. One of them has the small Fighting Box sub package, Farfetch'd, Hitmonlee, and Marshadow as cards that can win the game without Chomp, and the other one has Greninja, another powerful stage 2 that can work in tandem to help Garchomp hit bigger breakpoints or also carry games completely on its own with aggressive starts that it has. One of the big things Chomp has going for it past all of this is the Pokemon ability lets you kind of shift through your deck and find exactly the utility cards that you need, because drawing a second card every turn in the 20 card deck means you hit the bottom and find all of your tools very quickly once Garchomp is online. If you're interested in running down the dirtily control decks hiding behind things like Druddigon, Luxray is definitely a deck for you in today's tier list roundup. This 3 energy attack cracks anything on the board for 120 points of damage, which when used in tandem with our Electabuzz to soften up larger things for 40 points in advance clears out most things in the metagame. The real power in this deck definitely comes from the supporter Volkner, though, letting you fire your Luxray off 2 or sometimes even 3 turns in a row, often closing games out very, very quickly. Venusaur is a fan favorite Pokemon that's been struggling to be competitive in Pokemon Pocket since it released. Our most recent metagame featuring more small damage attackers thanks to Cyrus making them more relevant has given Venusaur room to be a somewhat competitive deck. It also gains some new tools that are excellent for it as well. Shaman gives you an additional means of healing your plant monster every turn, and Rocky Helmet means that you're outputting a little bit of extra damage as your opponent hits you again and again and again. Venusaur is definitely a metagame choice deck. It excels against things like Darkrai and other smaller hitters, while it comes up very poor against decks like Gyarados and Charizard that are blasting you for large amounts in a single go. Our last 2 deck lists in the C tier feature just 2 basic Pokemon each, the 18 trainer Pachirisu deck, as well as the Skarmory Bastiodon deck. If you're someone that enjoys relatively scripted, straightforward gameplay, these decks have consistently aggressive draws and do the same thing game in and game out. That being said, their linear strategy is also their downfall. Decks that are able to disrupt them a little bit or line up well into the essentially only thing that you are doing are going to consistently run you out of the game. It's also worth noting that the ultimately low basic count in these decks means you're also going to struggle from a consistency standpoint in some of your games where you simply just don't have enough Pokemon to go around. Moving along to our B tier decks today, we have things that are really starting to shine competitively, and I think anything from here on up is an excellent choice if you like the play patterns of it, if you're looking to win in Pokemon Pocket right now. These are all deck lists that are very regularly putting up top finishes in Pokemon Pocket's largest tournaments. Our B tier decks right now, in my opinion, are Darkrai with Weavile and Weezing, fighting variations featuring Lucario, Aerodactyl, and Rampardos, Dialga builds featuring EX payoffs such as Yanmega and Licky Licky, Manaphy, Palkia water decks, Charizard, Moltres, and Gyarados, Greninja. Darkrai EX is headlining a number of control as well as aggressive decks in this metagame, with the aggressively slanted ones featuring Weavile and Weezing being solidly B tier in my opinion. These are decks where when your draw comes together, especially with Darkrai and Dawn to push the energy to your lead, you run people over before the game starts. However, your most aggressive draws have a lot of moving pieces, and it's really easy to miss a beat with one of them and not have it come together perfectly, giving you a kind of clunky and awkward start that other decks are able to exploit and take an advantage of. That being said, these decks are definitely still competitive, and you're someone looking to get game wins fast, they're an excellent choice for doing that. Fighting variations featuring fossil Pokemon like Aerodactyl EX and Rampardos as their finishers have some of the most consistent startings in the game because those fossils can't be your guaranteed basic on 1. This makes us far more likely get to lead on something like a Hitmonlee, which is fantastic in a variety of matchups, especially those looking to build up something like a Darkrai slower on their bench. One of the big advantages of playing Rampardos as your finisher as opposed to something like Gallade that we talked about in the lower tier is that Rampardos is only a single knockout point, but lets it synergize with our Marshadow effect a lot more cleanly, since when it's getting knocked out, we typically still have points to give, letting Marshadow have a chance to close the game out. Aerodactyl EX is a card that's really come into its own in the space-time Smackdown metagame. While it's always been a very efficient attacker, dealing 80 for just 2 energy, not only does it have Lucario powering it up to 100 or 120 points of damage now, but the Primeval Law Pokemon ability is more relevant than it's ever been, stopping something like an Execute from hitting Executor early when it wants to start out in that active spot, or preventing a Magneton from turning into a Magnezone once it moves up front is incredibly powerful and often game winning. The most successful Dialga variations are ones that feature other EX Pokemon as their follow-up attackers. This is ideal because it means all of your Pokemon are giving up 2 knockout points, meaning your opponent has to chew their way through not 1 but 2 hefty HP pools if they want to close the game out. There are a variety of colorless attackers that Dialga is excellent at powering up that fit this bill, with Yanmega and Mew EX being the most popular, but Licky Licky EX also making some noteworthy appearances as well. Yanmega in particular has stellar breakpoints in this metagame because its 120 damage on a grass type Pokemon lets it clear out dark Pokemon with weakness to grass, such as Weavile and Darkrai, in a single blow. Licky Licky, on the other hand, while being a little bit less consistent, requiring a coin flip to deal 140, can not only clear out those Weaviles and Darkrai's on a heads, but also knock out things like Magnezone that have 140 HP in this metagame as well. Palkia and Manaphy are both incredibly powerful water Pokemon from the Space-Time Smackdown expansion that spawned new ways to play this energy type. Manaphy absolutely loves you having a critical amount of basic Pokemon, so it can generate you 2 extra water energy per turn, and Palkia serves as double duty, both being a payoff for Manaphy's acceleration with its 4 energy attack, but also serving as a serviceable lead Pokemon in the games where Manaphy is nowhere to be found, putting in chip shots of 30 damage every turn for just a single energy investment. There's been a few different ways to build this archetype that have been successful, with the Mythical Island Vaporeon variation being the most popular among them. My personal favorite is the Blastoise variation on your screen, though, because this is a card that's excellent at both ramping up to the max of 5 energy, but also is pretty serviceable at hitting for 100 for 3. Something that's especially noteworthy about the most successful Manaphy builds, though, is definitely the inclusion of a minimum of 7 basic Pokemon, because it's so important that you have 2 on your bench every time you're activating Manaphy's attack. Charizard Moltres has been among our top performing decks since Genetic Apex launched the game, and it still remains one today. The addition of Pokemon communication to this archetype means you assemble your powerful Stage 2 monster more consistently than ever. The good draws in this deck are difficult for a lot of decks to keep up with, and it absolutely dominates the things in the metagame that are depending on EX Pokemon, since you can typically blow away 2 of those with your 200-point blast before they can have counterplay to you. The things that tend to give Charizard a hard time are the slower single knockout point decks that can hit it multiple times over the course of the game, only giving up a single point each time you crush for 200. Gyarados Greninja was one of the breakout decks from the Mythical Island expansion, and it still remains powerful today. This deck lists 2-pronged attack of Greninja's Water Shurikens alongside Gyarados' 140 damage, and Drudagon's Rough Skin lets you clear through a lot of things in the metagame in just a single hit once you get everything online. This deck list tends to dismantle anything that can't attack your bench, while it really struggles into things that can, especially the fighting variations featuring Hitmonlee, which can kick a Magikarp for 30 before it ever has a chance to evolve. Next up, we have our A tier. These are deck lists that are incredibly competitive and have had some of the highest play rates in our largest tournament since the Space-Time Smackdown expansion released. Our A tier deck lists right now, in my opinion, are Executor Celebi, Magnezone Fighting Variations, Magnezone Darkrai Control, and Darkrai Greninja Control. Darkrai Magnezone burst onto the scene the weekend our expansion release, putting up a dominating performance. As the formats matured a little bit over our second week, it's still seeing a high play rate with reasonable results, but it's not the format dominating powerhouse that we thought it could have been after that first weekend. This deck list tends to really excel against people that can't punish its slow setup in the back. Between Darkrai and Drudagon, you get to deal a lot of damage to your opponent's lead Pokemon without ever risking much more than a single knockout point yourself, and more importantly, not having to invest any energy to get your damage going. One of the big draws of this deck is the fact that Magnezone is a card that fully self-charges, meaning it can be building up to start attacking once your Drudagon eventually goes down, while you're also building up Darkrai simultaneously, getting in chip shots and having your final endgame attacker. Magnezone easily feels like one of the best cards in Pokemon Pocket right now in general. It has a hefty HP pool, it blasts for a large amount of damage, it only gives up a single knockout point when it goes down, and you tie all of this together with the fact that Genetic Apex Magneton means that you can play it without any lightning energy in your energy zone. In a way, the rest of the A tier is entirely warped around this deck being relatively popular. It actually lines up poorly into the Greninja Darkrai deck, the Celebi Executor decks, and the Hitmonlee Magnezone that we're all going to talk about here in a moment. That being said, it still boasts a solid win rate overall because it has such good matchups into the everything else portion of the field that a lot of people are playing in our tournament settings. Darkrai Greninja has gained metagame relevance, kind of being the go bigger control deck to the Magnezone Darkrai deck that was the initial contender in the format. It's essentially saying, hey, you want to sit there behind a Drudagon and build up? I'm going to do the same as you, but I'm going to do it better because in addition to Darkrai chipping away at you, I'm also going to be throwing out Greninja Water Shurikens, meaning I get 40 free damage per turn while you only get 20. That being said, while this one is favored in the Darkrai Control mirror match, it has a little bit worse matchups into some of the other top contenders getting absolutely decimated by things like Executor Celebi because it lacks a big hitter like Magnezone to clear out that Executor lead. Our next Magnezone deck in the A tier is the one featuring the Fighting Box package. Magnezone is a pretty solid finisher here because it only offers up one knockout point, which lets it work cleanly with Mars Shadow's Revenge attack. It's also a card that's very good when going first, which complements the fact that cards like Hitmonlee attacking for 1 energy tend to shine when going second. This is definitely the deck list that has the most polarized matchup table among our top tier decks. It's incredibly favored against other popular things like Charizard Moltres, Gyarados Greninja, and Darkrai Magnezone, but it also almost never beats any of the Executor decks that we're going to talk about here next. Executor EX decks featuring Celebi as their secondary attacker kind of feel like the deck to beat in Pokemon Pocket right now. They have a chance to win almost any game that they play with how aggressive Executor is right off the bat, dealing 80 damage for just 1 energy, along with 160 HP pull that gets buffed up by Giant Capes and Ericas and Potions, can be very difficult for a lot of things to take down. This archetype has a powerful matchup into everything else in the A tier, being over 60% against the Magnezone Hitmonlee decks, Darkrai Greninja, and Darkrai Magnezone in our recent tournament data. The place where this deck really struggles are against a couple of the things in the lower tier, in particular Gyarados, Greninja, and Charizard, giving this archetype a run for its money since it can blow away your big HP pools in just 1 or 2 attacks typically. Finally, we saved the best for last. The S tier decks in Pokemon Pocket right now, in my opinion, is whatever your favorite pet deck is that I very pointedly ignored in this video, that you are leaving a very visceral comment down below letting me know that how dare I leave it out. On a less sarcastic note, I actually think Pokemon Pocket's current metagame is really well balanced, and I'm intentionally leaving what I think are the 4 best decks in that A tier category that I just talked about, because it doesn't feel like there's anything based on the data or my anecdotal experience playing that can't be checked by something else. Unless there's a new breakout deck that has yet to be discovered, I would bet we're going to have kind of a cyclical metagame in Pokemon Pocket's largest tournament. We're going to be constantly chasing our tail a little bit, where one week Executor pops up and then Charizard and Gyarados run that down, and then fighting decks pop up to hit that, and then control decks and Executor run down the fighting deck. So we'll just kind of go in a circle until our next card packs release here at the end of the month. I really appreciate everybody that made it all the way through to the end of the video here today. I know this is a good bit longer than the previous tier list video that I did. I'd love to hear feedback in the comments down below if you think it's worth getting into all the nitty-gritty details in those D and C tier deck lists, or if you would prefer that they just get a quick blurb mention without getting into the specifics, while this video focuses more on that A, B, and sometimes S tier decks that are the cream of the crop and the most competitive things that we have going on. If you happen to be new to the channel, consider subscribing here. I post roundups like this, as well as off-meta deck highlights and high-level tournament gameplay here 7 days a week, and I'd love to see you come back again sometime. If you haven't done so already, I'd implore you to smash the like button on this video to help it reach some more people, and I hope your next pack that you open is a fantastic one. Hopefully, we'll see you back again tomorrow.